When I was a student working on a degree in creative writing, there was a day when my fellow students and I were all sitting around a table thinking about the state of the world. And one of my poet friends asked, "How can we write poetry at a time like this?" Now maybe you're watching this right when I'm making it and asking the same question. Maybe you're watching this in 5 years and wondering how, with things as they are, you have any business putting your time and energy into something as frivolous as poetry, or a novel, or some other kind of literary project. Maybe you're asking this question because the whole global world is in terrible shape. Maybe it's because you're navigating a new and difficult illness. Maybe your local community has been struck by a natural disaster or some other tragedy. Maybe tensions are high at work. Maybe your family is fracturing. I don't know what it is because the screen only goes one way, but I do know that most, if not all of us, will find ourselves asking how we can write at a time like this. When there are real, sometimes crushing problems, whether at home or abroad, shouldn't you be doing something more important than whatever little thing you're scribbling into your notebook?
This just in, folks. Give up on writing.
Well, hold on. Actually, my thought then, and my thought now, and my thought, I'm sure, in whatever bleak future our timeline is pointing us towards, is this. At times like these, why wouldn't we keep writing? To spoil my own story, even though we had that conversation about whether it was worth writing poems in a troubled time, all of us in that room kept writing poems. So today, I want to share a few thoughts that may be helpful if you find yourself asking, how can I write at a time like this? This is by no means a comprehensive list, but hopefully it can help you to find some good reasons to keep writing, even if you start to wonder whether it's worth it. Back when we asked that question for the first time, I think the real question we were discussing was something more like, these times call for direct political action, so what good are a few poems? And if that's the question, the most immediate response is, who said your writing couldn't be direct political action? In an essay entitled Why I Write, George Orwell said, "What I have most wanted to do throughout the past 10 years is to make political writing into an art. My starting point is always a feeling of partisanship, a sense of injustice. When I sit down to write a book, I do not say to myself, I am going to produce a work of art. I write it because there is some lie that I want to expose, some fact to which I want to draw attention, and my initial concern is to get a hearing. But I could not do the work of writing a book or even a long magazine article if it were not also an aesthetic experience." So Orwell was committed to his literary priorities, but he was also motivated by a desire to take the rhetorical fight, so to speak, to bad actors. When she came to visit my program around the same time that we were asking these questions, the poet Rita Dove read her poem Parsley, which, as the footnote points out, is about how in 1937 the dictator Rafael Trujillo ordered 20,000 blacks killed because they could not pronounce the letter R in the Spanish word for parsley. Dove's poem was written decades after that order was given, and then I heard her read it even decades after that. But it's not hard to imagine how her writing responded directly to the politics of her time, or to contemplate its resonances in times since. When the student poets were asking themselves whether they should be doing something more important than writing poems, the former poet laureate, Rita Dove, was demonstrating how poetry can be direct and meaningful political action. At the same time, we had a teacher who would often urge us poets to take risks in our work. Whenever he did, he'd also toss out, almost under his breath, "Take a risk. In some places of the world, you can go to jail for writing poems." His point was to say that we shouldn't let our fears prevent us from writing the poems that we had inside us. My point is that if people have gone to jail for writing poetry, there's no justification for thinking our poetry doesn't matter, even or especially in difficult times. Poetry is not a frivolous thing. It's an important and meaningful thing. But maybe you're not in a position or don't have the desire to engage directly with the turmoil of the world. On this show, the goal has always been to present options and to expand your set of writerly tools, never to tell you what you should be doing. And today is no different. If you want to go out and start writing protest songs, that's great, but you don't have to. Maybe your writing has a different value. The rhetorical scholar Kenneth Burke kept a Latin motto in his study and put it at the beginning of his book, A Grammar of Motives, that translates to, towards the purification of war. Burke wasn't, in doing that scholarship, going out and taking direct political action, but he was developing frameworks and theories for understanding people's motives and language, with the idea, as I understand it, that we just wouldn't need war if we learned how to use our words. And when we talked about the rhetoric of ancient Rome, we noted that modern scholars have sometimes faulted Quintilian for not doing more to stand up to the emperors, as if a teacher of rhetoric, even a prominent one, were in a position to do all that much to overhaul a whole imperial system. But many more have noted that Quintilian's approach to rhetoric was a model for less repressive times that followed, and I would add, may have had the real benefit of producing students who were more humane and thoughtful as they went out into the world. So Quintilian was not directly engaged in political action, but his writing certainly contributed value to the world in other ways. And speaking of teachers of rhetoric, now might be a good time to mention my playlist on rhetorical self-defense, so you can familiarize yourself with some of the manipulative strategies that the baddies use.
Wow, all this just to shill your own content.
Come on, don't act surprised when the YouTube person acts like a YouTube person.
I'm not, and I guess the Mars video is okay. But let's not undersell the value of using your writing as a way to document personal slights and pass the time while you plot your glorious revenge.
I mean, I guess that's one thing you could do, but do we really need to be so grim about it?
Look at me, bud. Grim is part of the package.
Fine, fair enough. But I guess what I mean is that when you find yourself asking how you can write in times like these, you could choose to take on those times directly, maybe like Orwell. Or maybe your writing serves to contribute something of value without directly tackling the source of your distress, maybe more like Quintilian. But you could also write things that offer a more personal or intimate value. Maybe you're not advocating for changes in policy or contributing to changes in society. Maybe you're just connecting with other human beings in an affirming and productive way. If you've been around the show for any amount of time, you probably know that Gerard Manley Hopkins is one of, if not my #1 favorite poet. His poems, however, were published after he died. But what a difference they have made for so many since. So when Hopkins writes, "I wake and feel the fell of dark, not day," and then goes on to say, "I am gall, I am heartburn. God's most deep decree bitter would have me taste. My taste was me. Bones built in me, flesh filled, blood brimmed the curse." Well, you might, like me, say, hey, same.
And that makes 3 of us, bud.
But when you're feeling that way, it can be strangely affirming to know that you are not the only one. You might think that your essay about your first pregnancy just isn't important enough to write about in times like these, but you can't know that there's nobody else in the world who wouldn't benefit from hearing that story. We're all a bunch of scared, fundamentally isolated specks of dust glued to a slightly bigger speck of dust hurtling through the void toward the heat death of the universe. So how great is it to read some literature and know that we're not alone in our anxieties or even in our triumphs? When you decide that your writing isn't important enough for times like these, you're also deciding to withhold an opportunity for human connection from someone else. And honestly, what could be more important than that? But we've been doing a lot of serious talk, so I want to highlight that the benefit of your writing could be not in how it contributes or responds to times like these, but in how it gives people a break from times like these. There's got to be a special place in whatever good afterlife you believe in for the people who make the silly little nonsense animations that the algorithm keeps throwing at me. You can't tell me that creating goofy distractions isn't a public good.
Well, then somebody should get this show a medal. You're hopelessly goofy, and I'm an endearing distraction.
Well, what I mean is that your writing doesn't have to be serious to be useful or valuable or important. Write a lighthearted poem about your cat and let somebody else have a moment of relief from whatever they're worrying about. Write a short story about your favorite video game character so you can share some time with others lost in the weeds of theory crafting and nostalgia. When we find ourselves in times like these, the simple reality is that people are going to need ways to relax, to decompress, to find levity in the midst of the heaviness. If laughter is the best medicine, times like these call for humorists just as much as activists. So if you're in the business of silly cat limericks, don't sell yourself short. You may not be changing geopolitical realities, but you might just be helping someone else get through the day, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Of course, everything I've said so far assumes that your writing is going out in the world. But what if you don't have any plans to publish? What if your writing began as a personal pastime during less troubling days? Well, you'll never guess it, but I still think you should write, even and especially in times like these. I recently shared on Substack that I've started reading the collected essays of Michel de Montaigne, if you'll excuse my French. And the introduction to the volume notes that Montaigne started writing after he retired and began to experience depression. It says specifically, as he wrote, he was gradually discovering in writing essays the true and endless subject of his work, himself. He found that the exploration of this absorbing subject relieved his depression, and that the continued exploration of its complexities had its effect in changing the subject. He was gradually becoming less strict in his moral views and less interested in Stoic and ancient virtues, more tolerant of his own inconsistencies, more diffuse and easygoing both in his writing and in his life. By writing in times like these, which for him meant personal circumstances of depression, Montaigne found relief for himself, and in considering his work over time, we can see that writing also changed him for the better. And modern research verifies this very Montaignian case study. You don't have to look far to find scholars and practitioners touting the benefits of creative and expressive writing for mental health. Maybe it's just because I've spent the most time around writers, but I've noticed a readiness among writers to dismiss the value of their own writing. But I've never heard someone who loves knitting say, "How can we knit at times like these?" I have heard writers ask that question, though. So if writing is something that you like doing, if it fills your soul or brightens your day or helps you to process and make sense of the world, how could you not write in times like these? And hey, I'm just saying, but if we embraced the essay as Montaigne did, and we all ended up more tolerant of inconsistencies, more diffuse and easygoing, and less strict in our moral views, well, maybe we wouldn't end up in times like these as often as we do. The essayist Philip Lopate has said we ought to be training young people not just to assert a claim or use bigger words, but to think critically, to think against themselves. If our own personal writing practices trained us in that kind of critical thought, then even if nobody else ever read what we had written, I think the world would be in a better place. And obviously, that's where I've chosen to plant my flag. This whole show exists to encourage people to write and to help them to do it better so that whatever kind of writing they want to do, they can find success and satisfaction. If there were more people committed to being thoughtful writers, the world would unavoidably be a better place. And doing something to make sure there are more thoughtful writers in the world is absolutely something that is within my reach. And that's really key, I think. There are a lot of people out there who are ready to tell you how you should be writing, and there are just as many people out there who will tell you how you should be responding to times like these. But there aren't any truly right or wrong ways to make your contribution. Whether you're taking on the times head on or just cultivating a private writing practice that improves your mental health and moderates your worst impulses. But before we finish, I also want to leave you some space to accept that sometimes times like these may not be the time to write. In my own recent history, I finished my schooling in the shadow of a global health crisis. And then I got a job that moved me to, well, to be frank, the most capital M miserable little town hours away from anywhere worth being. In times like those, it really did feel like my creative well had dried up. And apart from this show, I really didn't write much. And in some ways, I'm still climbing out of that hole. So, of course, because my name is Writing with Andrew, I'm going to do everything I can to encourage you to write. You got to stay faithful to the branding after all. But I also recognize, because I've been there, that sometimes, in times like these, writing really isn't on the table. And that's okay. There's no need to experience times like these while also heaping a pile of creative guilt onto yourself for all the writing that you aren't doing. Really, this is my point. When I heard my fellow poet ask, how can we write in times like these? I heard the implicit assumption that writing wasn't valuable enough to keep doing when the going got tough. My point today is nothing more nor less than to say that your writing is and can be valuable, and that times like these call for you and your voice to be heard however it makes sense for you. Writing isn't a luxury good for days of leisure. It's a human necessity, even in times like these, and you absolutely do not need to listen to those voices that will tell you that writing is a frivolous use of your time. For one, if in times like these someone is encouraging you not to write, maybe consider why they would prefer you keep quiet. And then, whether it's a letter to your legislative representative, a lesson about critical thinking, a text message to a friend, or a quiet journal entry about your day, put your words on the page and see what a difference they can make. while also, of course, affording yourself patience and understanding if writing really is incompatible with times like these, whatever and whenever those times may be. And that, dear viewers, is my speech. Whether you're watching today, next month, or in a few years, times like these are sure to cross your path in one form or another, and it's normal and reasonable to wonder in such times what the point of writing is. But of course, there's always a point. You matter. Your writing matters, and it's hard to predict how much good you can do just by putting pen to paper, or finger to keyboard, as it were. So go write something, whether you share it with someone or not. And if today just isn't the day for writing, we're returning to the history of rhetoric next week, and you surely won't want to miss that. So take it easy as much as you can, and we'll see you then.